Joining us now to analyze today's headlines is Chenjerai Kumanyika. He is an assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University. Hi, Chenjerai.
Hi, how are you doing?
Doing well, thanks for joining us. Reuters is reporting three separate sources that say Russian forces have begun fighting alongside the troops of Bashar al-Assad in Syria. U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry has spoken to his Russian counterpart this week, but Russian officials are staying silent on the claims and only reiterating that they've been sending weapons to the Syrian government. The U.S. and some of its allies have been separately bombing the Islamic State in Syria and northern Iraq for many months now, with no discernible results other than to likely strengthen ISIS and Assad. The Syrian crisis has unleashed the worst refugee crisis on the shores of Europe since World War II. Meanwhile, European Commission President Jean-Claude Juncker announced yesterday that the EU would share the responsibility for a total of 160,000 refugees among member states. But German Vice-Chancellor Sigmar Gabriel characterized the number as, quote, a drop in the ocean. The U.S. has so far only taken in 1,500 Syrian refugees. More than a third of the entire 22 million-strong Syrian population is internally or externally displaced. Well, Chenjerai, how do you characterize Obama's policy on Syria?
Well, Sonali, I think that Obama's policy on Syria is really what I would call a symptom-based policy. This is the result of many years of destabilizing other regions. And, if you look at Libya, we came in and Obama bombed and abandoned that country. The same is true in Afghanistan. There was a surge and then eventually a retreat, but this created all kinds of problems. So, and now, there's, discussion of, should there have been airstrikes? Should we have, try to take down Assad, supported Assad against the rebels? But that symptom-based approach might have worked in the past for U.S. foreign policy, but neither the current migrant situation, Syria, or ISIS is like that. These types of situations demand deeply transformative solutions. And going forward, it'll be interesting to see if Obama's policy in Syria is going to prioritize the relationship with Russia over, some of the other pressing concerns like ISIS and, the people of Syria.
Meanwhile, as the world has finally begun paying attention to Syrian misery, another horrific conflict has fallen by the wayside. Saudi Arabia this week escalated its war on Yemen, the poorest country in the Middle East that lies just south of its border. Saudi airstrikes bombarded the Yemeni capital of Sana'a this morning, apparently hitting the homes of Houthi rebel leaders that the Saudis fear are receiving Iranian support. U.S. military advisors have been providing Saudi Arabia with logistical and intelligence support in the war. Saudi Arabia is the U.S.'s largest weapons buyer, and this is the first major war it is engaged in. The Saudis have been condemned by international aid groups for essentially starving Yemenis by blocking food and medical shipments. A Saudi-led Navy inspection has halted aid this week. Images of sick, starving, and skeletal Yemeni children are found in the Arab press, but the U.S. and Western media has been stunningly silent on the war. Well, Chenjerai, why is there so much media silence on this war?
Well, it really is a good question, especially given the amount of attention that's being paid to U.S. presidential race and, what's going on in Kentucky and things like that. But, if we look, typically government officials, our president, the White House is able to drive media coverage. And, we know that Obama has been closely meeting with King Salman during this period. And so they're probably, it seems logical that would have some effect, on what he's willing to comment on. So far, the comments that have come out of the White House on this is essentially that they support Saudi's efforts to do what they claim is just to strengthen, and create a functional government in Yemen. But I don't know. I mean, these military tactics, we see the impact that it has. On a personal note, I have a student who is from Yemen, and I've just seen the impact of these tactics on her and her family. And it's just really been, it really begs us to think about different kinds of solutions.
And finally, here in the U.S., for the first time in 30 years, Seattle teachers have gone on strike. The Seattle Education Association, or SEA, says contract talks with the school district over the Labor Day weekend went awry, and teachers walked off the job on the first day of school. The SEA represents more than 5,000 teachers, and the strike has led to more than 50,000 students staying home from school. At the heart of the conflict is Seattle's charter school system, although pay raises and teacher evaluations, as well as the length of the workday, are also sticking points. The last time Seattle teachers struck in 1985, they were off the job for 25 days, and that strike was only resolved with the Washington state governor personally intervening. Chenjerai, how important is this strike coming at this time?
Well, I think it's a crucial strike. To be honest, it's surprising that there have not been more teacher strikes in recent years, given the regressive changes that have happened in public education in the United States. But looking at the situation in Seattle, there's often an effort to characterize teachers' unions as an entitled group that are bellyaching, complaining, and making students and taxpayers pay the price. So what I think is key to remember in this case is that last month, the Washington Supreme Court, which is the highest appeal court, ordered the state in contempt of court for failure to fund public education sufficiently and fairly. And as a result, the state is now facing $100,000 a day in fines that's being put into an education fund until the legislature passes a more acceptable plan. So, these teachers are now intensifying their strategic tactic to draw more attention to a problem that has been acknowledged by the local government already.
Well, Chenjerai, I want to thank you so much for joining us today. We'll talk to you again next week.
Thank you.
Chenjerai Kumanyika is an assistant professor of communication studies at Clemson University. This is Uprising. We'll be right back.